remember. These were on like they were configured like a stand or something.
Okay, we're having a quick conversation about the old laundromat in Burkburnett. What was the lady's name who owned it?
It was Mrs. Stimpson,
Stimpson?
Stimpson, and she owned that laundromat for many years, and that was her way of making a living. She had a lot of older ladies that worked with her. Mrs. Stimpson was a pretty large lady, and she had very large arms because she was used to lifting those big number 3 wash tubs full of wet clothes on a regular basis.
Oh, Lord. I remembered vague memories of this as a child and asked Mom about it, so we're learning about Mrs. Stimpson's laundry today. I remember walking in this, and it was big open pots of hot water and ringers, and Mom's telling me what it's like to run this. So
And
we look here.
and usually when you went in, the clothes, you had pre-sorted the clothes at home, and you started out with the white clothes first, and then things that were not quite as soiled, such as towels and things like that, or maybe colored blouses or shirts that people wore. And then you went on down to the work clothes, which my daddy worked in the oil field, and so those were washed last because they were dirtier than some of the other clothes. There were several setups for the laundry, and they were on a frame, and in the center was a wringer that would move around. The first one would be the wash, which was and there were pipes that ran across the building, and you had a hose that you pulled down. The first one was strictly hot water, where the soap went in and the clothes went in first.
Right.
And
how
then
did the hot water get in there?
There was a hose that was overhead, and they had, I guess, I can't remember exactly what kind of a handle they had on it, but that you could turn it on and off, and it would go back up on a spring mechanism. And the wash cycle was very hot water usually, and the soap. You had an agitator on the machine there. That was actually the washing machine.
Mm-hmm.
After you ran that as long as you wanted, and I can't remember if it was timed or not, but I don't much think so. I think you just washed it till you thought it was ready. And then you stopped the agitation, and you fished the clothes out with something that appeared to be like part of a broomstick.
Right.
And you would pull the wringer over between that tub and the rinse tub. Whenever you felt like it was a long enough wash cycle, then you used the wringer that was in the middle and ran the clothes through the wringer to get the excess water out, and it went into the first rinse cycle. And you agitated those clothes in that rinse cycle for a few minutes, and then put them through the wringer one more time into the second rinse cycle.
Right.
And
now, which rinse did you say they had the bluing in? And what the heck is bluing?
Well, I'll tell you about that in just a minute. And
Okay.
after you went through the second rinse cycle, then it went through the wringer again to squeeze the excess water out completely into the clean laundry tub.
Okay.
And then you offloaded them out of there into your containers to take them back home as soon as those were free. Some of the clothing, especially the white clothing, they would use a product called bluing, and
Right.
it came in a little glass bottle, and it was very, very strong. You would put it into the last rinse cycle to make the white clothes look whiter. And also, there were some of the clothes, like maybe shirts or clothes that you would iron that you might want to starch, and you usually did that along in where the rinse cycle was too. You kind of separated those out and did them all at one time.
Right. Where did the starch come from?
They made the starch in the other room, and they would bring it to you in buckets, and it was usually hot. But and they put the starch product in it, but they usually would furnish a big strainer, like a tea strainer, so you wouldn't get any lumps, so the starch would be smooth. And you had some work to do before you got to the laundry because everything had to be separated. We usually carried it in wicker baskets that had plastic liners in them. So you had all the white clothes, all of the towels, all of the clothes that you normally would wear to school or things like that, or mother's blouses and things like that, and then you'd have daddy's work clothes. They were all separated when you got there, so it made your washing process go a lot smoother. In the adjacent room, they had a huge boiler to heat all of the water for the whole building. And they also had a huge dryer that a lot of people use to dry their clothes commercially, like our dryers are today. It was powered by gas and it was extremely hot.
Whoa.
And Mrs. Stimpson and a couple of her people ran that. You were not allowed to dry clothes in that. They had to dry them for you. And I think she did a fairly good business of people just bringing their laundry and dropping it off. They did the whole laundry process. But most housewives preferred to do their own laundry so they could handle it the way they wanted it to. And it's that was a place that you saw a lot of your friends all the time, because usually everybody had one day that they allocated in their week to do the laundry.
And a chance to visit.
And very few people had home laundries, and if they did, they had a agitator washer with a wringer on it and a tub at home, and it was usually outside the house in what they call the wash house.
Right.
And they usually had to heat their own water, or they might, if they were really lucky and upscale, have their own hot water heater in the wash house.
Right.
But that was how laundry was done in those days. And after you finished with all of this, you normally took those baskets of clothes home and hung them on the clothesline.
Right. I remember clotheslines at Grandma's house and bags for clothespins.
They had she had bags for clothespins, and the lines were usually wire.
Right.
And if they got a little stretched out, Daddy would go out and had turnbuckles on them, and he'd get the pliers and tighten them up so they'd all be tight. And they were attached to iron pipe that was welded in a T formation.
Yep.
And usually have 3 or 4 clotheslines of wire, and depending on how big a family you had.
Right.
Mother and Daddy's clotheslines had been around for a while.
Right, I remember those clotheslines. Now that place, the laundry sounds really hot. Was there anything you could do to cool off in there while you were?
Well, they had some big fans in there that would kind of dry the perspiration, and they also had tubs that were iced down of drinks in there, like Grape Pet and root beer, and that was always the big treat, is you got a drink of something whenever you went to the laundry. So that was laundry day about once a week, and I probably enjoyed it more than Mother did, because I didn't have to do as much heavy lifting as she did.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Well, I remember going in at least once with you or grandmother or somebody. So it's.
And I guess it gave some employment to some ladies that probably needed extra money. They were on hard times, because she had a regular crew of women that worked in there, and they worked pretty hard, and they were in hot conditions doing heavy lifting almost all day long. But I think they were always very personable, and they knew everybody in town, and so it gave them a chance to have some employment when they didn't have any job skills, probably.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mom. I appreciate you sharing that.
In the old times.